They thought they'd built the perfect corpse. June 27th, 1944. Cherbourg Harbor, France. Colonel Alden G. Sibley of the U.S. Army's 156th Port Construction and Repair Group stands on the shattered quay at first light, his engineering survey team spreading out across what should be one of Europe's most strategic deep-water harbors. The morning reveals a landscape of calculated devastation that makes his hands go still on his field notebook. This isn't battle damage. This is architectural murder. Sibley's boots crunch across twisted steel and pulverized masonry as he makes his way toward the harbor basin. What unfolds before him defies immediate comprehension. 27 ships, freighters, tugs, barges, even a massive floating dry dock lie scuttled in precise formations across every navigable channel. The Germans hadn't simply sunk vessels in a panic. They had positioned each hull according to tide tables and depth charts, creating an interlocking barrier of steel designed to block, damage, and delay. Two colossal gantry cranes, each weighing 90 tons and standing as tall as a 5-story building, have been toppled deliberately into the main shipping fairway. Their twisted girders form underwater mazes that no vessel can safely navigate, their steel arms reaching up from the depths like the fingers of drowned giants. But it's the details, the small, meticulous touches, that reveal the true depth of German thoroughness. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Every view helps bring more stories like this to life. The breakwaters that took French engineers 4 decades to construct have been breached in multiple locations, storm-driven waves now flooding through the gaps. Lock gates separating the inner basins from the outer harbor have been blown completely off their massive hinges. Every bollard has been cut away with acetylene torches. Every electrical transformer has been destroyed or stripped of copper wire. Every water main has been severed. Every warehouse roof has been systematically collapsed. Even the cold storage units and pumping stations have been reduced to rubble. Mines wait beneath the surface. Booby traps have been rigged in buildings, offices, and equipment sheds. 3 of Sibley's demolition experts are currently defusing charges beneath what remains of the harbor master's office floor. The official German declaration, delivered by General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben upon his surrender, just hours earlier, echoes in Sibley's mind like a dare. I have left you only the wreckage of a port. It will require at least 6 months to restore, assuming you possess the equipment and manpower, which you do not. The harbor is worthless. Sibley pulls out his field notebook and begins his preliminary assessment. Around him, engineering officers shout measurements. Divers in heavy suits prepare to descend into the dark, debris-choked water. Cranes are being positioned. The hum of generators rises over the sound of waves breaking through the shattered breakwaters. The clock has already started. The Allied armies pushing inland from Normandy are consuming ammunition, fuel, and supplies faster than the temporary beaches can deliver them. Without a functioning deep-water port, the entire offensive could grind to a halt within weeks. The mathematics are brutal and simple. Cherbourg must open, and it must open now. German intelligence has calculated this port will be dead for half a year. Sibley's initial assessment, based on similar disasters at Naples and Palermo, suggests 90 to 120 days minimum for basic operations. But what neither the Germans nor Sibley's own preliminary numbers account for is this. 3 years earlier, a very different kind of plan had been set in motion, an American doctrine built on the radical idea that construction could move faster than destruction, that logistics could win wars, that impossible timelines were just targets no one had been willing to meet yet. The journey to this moment of devastation, and to the confrontation of 2 utterly different philosophies of war, had begun on March 23, 1942, when Adolf Hitler issued Führer Directive Number 40. March 23, 1942. Führer Headquarters, East Prussia. Adolf Hitler signs Directive Number 40, and with a few strokes of his pen, seals the fate of every major port along the Atlantic Wall. The language is precise, almost clinical. Any fortress that falls to enemy forces must be rendered completely unusable for a minimum of 6 months. Cherbourg, positioned as the closest deep-water harbor to England, receives a red circle on the planning maps. When, not if, the Allies invade France, this port will be their lifeline, which means it must become their graveyard. The directive doesn't call for random destruction. It demands denial engineering, calculated devastation that will consume Allied time, equipment, and manpower even after German troops have withdrawn. It's a weapon that keeps killing long after the battle ends. Fast forward to April 1944. Korvettenkapitän Walter Hennecke arrives in Normandy as sea commandant for the region. He's not a warrior. He's a civil engineer who studied at the Technical University of Berlin. His service record shows bridge construction, harbor development, waterway management. He builds things. Now he's been ordered to perfect the art of unbuilding them. Admiral Theodor Kranke's instructions are unambiguous. Prepare Cherbourg for total destruction should the fortress fall. Hennecke accepts the assignment with the same methodical precision he once applied to construction projects. Throughout May 1944, as Allied invasion forces mass across the English Channel, Hennecke's teams work around the clock. Charts cover every surface of his headquarters. Tide tables, bathymetric surveys, structural diagrams, demolition calculations. The operation receives the mundane bureaucratic designation, Hafenvernichtung Plan 4, Harbor Destruction, Plan 4. This isn't sabotage, it's reverse engineering. Ships will be scuttled not randomly, but according to mathematical models that account for currents, depths, and salvage difficulty. Cranes will be toppled to create maximum obstruction. Breakwaters will be breached at intervals calculated to allow storm damage to compound the destruction over time. Every element serves the 6-month timeline. Hennecke's confidence comes from history. In Naples, it took Allied forces 11 weeks to restore basic port functions after German demolitions. Palermo required nearly 2 months. During World War I, the destruction of Belgian ports like Zeebrugge delayed Allied naval operations for months. The doctrine has been proven again and again. Systematic demolition buys time. The plan was built on careful data, proven experience, and established military doctrine. It had one fatal flaw. It assumed the enemy would rebuild the way Germany would. By early June, as Allied landing craft approached the Normandy coast, Hennecke's demolition teams stand ready. Charges are placed. Scuttling crews wait aboard designated vessels. Crane operators have rehearsed the toppling sequences. The timetable is set. All they need now is the order. And the Allies advancing from the beaches are bringing them closer to that moment with every passing hour. Phase 1 begins on May 15th, 1944. The 8,000-ton freighter SS Portland settles into the water at the entrance to the Grande Rade, Cherbourg's outer harbor. German engineers have calculated her position to the meter, exactly 200 meters from the channel entrance, placed to force any incoming vessel into a narrow, dangerous approach. She won't be alone for long. Over the following weeks, 26 more vessels follow her to the bottom. Freighters, tugs, barges, a massive floating dry dock. Each sinking is choreographed using tide tables and bathymetric charts. The hulls don't just block channels. They create overlapping fields of underwater obstacles, positioned like chess pieces to maximize long-term obstruction and damage risk. Phase 2 targets the port's skeleton, Demolition teams install over 500 separate charges throughout the harbor complex. The breakwater, 3 kilometers of stone that took French engineers 40 years to construct, receives special attention. Charges are placed at 17 strategic points. When detonated, they'll create gaps that allow storm waves to flood the harbor and compound the destruction naturally over time. The 2 90-ton gantry cranes that dominate the main shipping channel are next. Charges are positioned with surgical precision at their base supports. The goal isn't to destroy them, it's to topple them directly into the fairway, creating underwater obstacle courses that will take months to clear. Lock gates separating the inner basins from the outer harbor are blown completely off their hinges, the massive steel doors dropped into the channels like fallen drawbridges. Phase 3 strangles the lifelines. Teams work methodically through every support system. Electrical transformers are destroyed, copper wiring stripped and removed. Water mains are severed at key junctions. Pumping stations are demolished. Cold storage units are collapsed. Fuel tanks are drained and rendered inoperable. Every bollard along the quays is cut away with acetylene torches. Even if ships could somehow navigate the blocked channels, they'd have nothing to tie to. Every piece of equipment that could help unload cargo is disabled or removed. Phase 4 sets traps for the future. Mines are positioned throughout the channels, some fitted with anti-handling devices designed to detonate if disturbed. Booby traps are rigged in offices, warehouses, and equipment sheds. Time-delayed charges are hidden in strategic locations, set to explode days or weeks after the port falls. June 21, 26, 1944. The final sequence. As American forces close in on Cherbourg, Hennecke triggers the timetable. Cranes topple at precisely scheduled intervals. Lock gates are blown in sequence. The last vessels scuttle through the night, their positions marked on charts that will never reach Allied hands. On June 26th, General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben surrenders the fortress. His statement to American officers carries the weight of absolute certainty. I have left you only the wreckage of a port. It will require at least 6 months to restore. The Germans believed they had just bought half a year of safety. In reality, the countdown had started on a very different kind of operation. While German engineers were perfecting the art of demolition, American military planners were asking a different question entirely. What if logistics, not battlefield heroics, actually win wars? The U.S. Army Industrial College, founded in 1924, had been studying this premise for 2 decades. Their conclusion was radical for its time. Future conflicts would be decided not by who had the bravest soldiers or the best tactics, but by who could move more material, faster, and sustain operations longer than the enemy could disrupt them. It was an unglamorous philosophy. It didn't inspire paintings or monuments, but it would change everything. By the late 1930s, this doctrine produced an audacious requirement. American port construction units must be capable of restoring a completely destroyed harbor to basic operation within approximately 30 days. At the time, European military observers considered this timeline absurd, borderline delusional. Traditional harbor reconstruction took months, sometimes years. The Americans were either wildly optimistic or fundamentally misunderstanding the complexity of port operations. They were neither. The U.S. began building port construction units that looked less like military formations and more like industrial corporations in uniform. Each unit deployed with dozens of cranes and bulldozers, mobile machine shops capable of fabricating replacement parts on site, massive generators, compressors that could pump thousands of cubic feet of air per minute, and literal tons of prefabricated materials, steel plates, timber, concrete forms, piping. To German military observers, this seemed like grotesque overkill. Why burden an army with so much construction equipment when troops should be focused on combat? The answer lay in command philosophy. American officers were trained under mission-type orders. Senior commanders established objectives, junior officers determined methods. Initiative wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. When a port needed clearing, officers on the ground had authority to make bold decisions without waiting for approval from distant headquarters. This would matter immensely in the coming weeks. Two doctrines, two philosophies, on a collision course. The German approach: destroy ports systematically and assume restoration will follow traditional timelines based on how German forces would rebuild, with limited equipment and centralized command. The American approach: assume every port will be destroyed and design forces specifically engineered to rebuild faster than any enemy can imagine, with overwhelming equipment and decentralized execution. One side prepared to kill harbors, the other prepared to resurrect them. By June 1944, these opposing philosophies had never been tested against each other at scale. Cherbourg would be the proving ground. So when Colonel Sibley's report reached Allied headquarters in London on June 28th, cataloging the devastation, estimating 90 to 120 days for restoration, it didn't just describe a ruined harbor. It activated a plan years in the making. And the response would be unlike anything the German High Command had ever anticipated. June 27 to 29th, 1944. The survey continues. Sibley's teams work in organized chaos, mapping every wreck, every breach, every mine. Engineers wade through knee-deep water in flooded basins, taking measurements and photographs. Divers in heavy suits make the first cautious descents into the murky channels. What they find underwater is worse than what's visible from the surface. The toppled gantry cranes have created twisted labyrinths of girders and cables. Jagged steel protrudes at angles that could tear open a ship's hull. The scuttled vessels haven't simply settled. Many have shifted with tides and currents, creating unpredictable hazards. One diver surfaces and reports finding unexploded ordnance wedged between wreckage, waiting for the slightest disturbance. By June 29th, Sibley completes his preliminary assessment. The numbers are sobering. Based on previous operations, Naples required 11 weeks, Palermo nearly 2 months. Cherbourg will need 90 to 120 days to restore basic functionality. That's assuming no major complications, no additional German sabotage, and ideal weather conditions. It's a realistic estimate, perhaps even optimistic. And it aligns perfectly with German expectations. The report reaches London on June 30th. Major General John C. H. Lee, commanding the communications zone responsible for Allied logistics in Europe, reads Sibley's assessment in his headquarters. The implications crystallize immediately. The Allied armies are consuming supplies at rates the Normandy beaches cannot sustain. Ammunition expenditure is exceeding projections. Fuel demands are astronomical. Medical supplies are running thin. Without Cherbourg operational within weeks, not months, the entire offensive could stall before reaching Paris. Lee picks up the phone. His message to Supreme Headquarters is urgent and unambiguous. Cherbourg requires maximum priority. Every available port construction unit, every salvage ship, every piece of heavy equipment that can be spared. The response is immediate. Within 72 hours, the mobilization begins. Port construction units stationed in England receive new orders. The 1057th, the 1060th, the 1055th. Entire battalions are loaded onto transports and diverted to Cherbourg. Floating cranes capable of lifting hundreds of tons are moved across the channel. Salvage vessels, compressors, cutting equipment, mobile workshops, prefabricated materials, all converge on the shattered harbor. By early July, more than 11,000 U.S. Army engineers and Navy construction battalions are working in and around Cherbourg. It's 5 times larger than the German garrison that defended the fortress. They bring with them an industrial arsenal. Dozens of cranes, hundreds of bulldozers and trucks, massive generators, experimental sonar equipment, underwater welding torches, and mountains of steel, timber, and concrete. The port that the Germans killed is about to become the largest construction site in France. July 3, 1944. A bombed-out warehouse by the waterfront. Commodore William A. Sullivan steps through the doorway, Commander Edward Ellsberg at his side. Sullivan had overseen salvage operations at Pearl Harbor. Ellsberg literally wrote the textbook on naval salvage. They survey the space, blown-out windows, collapsed sections of roof, water damage everywhere, and nod. "This will do," Sullivan says. The nerve center of the most ambitious salvage operation of the war has just opened for business. July 3, 1944. The makeshift headquarters. Maps cover every intact wall of the damaged warehouse. Cigarette smoke hangs in the air. Outside, the thunder of generators and the clang of metal on metal never stops. Sullivan stands before 24 officers. Army engineers, Navy salvage experts, diving supervisors, construction battalion commanders. Someone presents the orthodox approach. Clear one channel methodically, establish a safe corridor, then gradually expand operations. It's prudent. It's safe. It's what the manual recommends. Sullivan cuts him off. "We don't have time for prudent." The plan, he announces, is unprecedented. Work will begin simultaneously in every sector of the harbor. Cherbourg is divided into zones, each assigned dedicated teams, divers and riggers for underwater operations, crane operators for heavy lifts, explosives experts for demolition, electricians and pipe fitters for infrastructure restoration. The port will operate 24 hours a day. Work lights will turn night into day. Generators will run continuously. Welding arcs will never stop sparking. One officer voices the obvious concern. "Sir, with that many operations happening at once." "We'll coordinate," Sullivan interrupts, "or we'll learn to." But this isn't just about machines and schedules. It's about people. Petty Officer James Barker, 23 from Pennsylvania, prepares his diving suit for descents into waters so murky he'll be working blind, feeling his way through twisted metal that could trap or crush him at any moment. Chief Warrant Officer Robert Chen operated civilian cranes in San Francisco before the war. Now he's positioning floating cranes over submerged wrecks, calculating lifts where a single miscalculation could snap cables and send tons of steel plummeting back into the harbor. Lieutenant Frank Morrison lost his best friend on Omaha Beach 3 weeks ago. He volunteered for Cherbourg because he couldn't carry a rifle anymore, shrapnel wound. But he could still read engineering drawings and coordinate electrical systems. This is his way of fighting back. The all-at-once approach creates immediate chaos. Crane operations interfere with diving schedules. Explosive demolitions force evacuations that delay other work. Communications break down. Near misses happen daily, a crane cable swinging too close to divers below, a blast detonating before all personnel have cleared the zone. Sullivan and Ellsberg scramble to synchronize operations, establishing signal protocols, staggered schedules, and safety zones. The learning curve is steep and unforgiving. July 5th. The first casualty. A salvage specialist triggers a delayed action booby trap while inspecting a warehouse crane mechanism. The blast kills him instantly and injures 2 others. Work stops for an hour. Then Sullivan makes a decision. They press on. Every man here volunteered knowing the risks. Slowing down only means more days of danger, more opportunities for things to go wrong. The crews return to their stations. If anything, their resolve hardens. But the biggest challenge still looms ahead. Two 90-ton gantry cranes lying across the main shipping channel, their twisted frames creating an underwater obstacle course that threatens to turn Sullivan's aggressive timeline into an impossible dream. July 3rd, 1944. 15 meters below the surface, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Briggs descends with his diving team into the main shipping channel. Visibility is nearly zero. He works by touch, running gloved hands along twisted girders and structural beams. Then his hand finds something unexpected, an intact main support frame. He surfaces with news that changes everything. The cranes weren't demolished. They were toppled. The structures are damaged but whole, which means, theoretically, they could be lifted instead of cut apart underwater piece by piece. Back in the warehouse headquarters, the proposal ignites immediate resistance. It's never been attempted at this scale, one salvage officer argues. 90 tons of twisted steel submerged for weeks, structural integrity unknown. If the cables snap during the lift, another adds, we lose the cranes, possibly the barges, and we're back to square one, except worse. Sullivan listens, then leans forward over the maps. Precedent is a luxury we don't have. Cutting them apart underwater will take 3 weeks minimum. We lift them whole, or this harbor stays closed. The room falls silent. Rig both cranes for lifting, Sullivan orders. We start July 4th. Independence Day, 1944. Dawn. 2 massive floating cranes, each capable of lifting several hundred tons, position themselves over the submerged gantry. It takes hours to get the alignment perfect. Below, divers work in shifts, attaching lifting cables to structural points that Briggs identified. By mid-morning, everything is ready. The crane engines roar to life. Cables go taut, water dripping from the braided steel. The strain is visible. Cables vibrating, winches groaning, diesel engines screaming. For a long moment, nothing happens. Men hold their breath. Someone mutters a prayer. Then, slowly, impossibly, the top of the gantry crane breaks the surface. Water pours from its frame in torrents, cascading like waterfalls. Higher it rises, revealing bent girders, torn metal, but the structure holds. The cables hold. By noon, the 90-ton gantry crane rests on a reinforced barge, dripping seawater onto the deck. The main shipping channel has just opened a critical passage. 200 kilometers away, German reconnaissance pilots fly over Cherbourg. Their report to intelligence officers is met with skepticism. One of the massive cranes is gone, the second is being rigged for lifting. Impossible. Verify your observation. The aerial photographs arrive that evening. The intelligence officers stare in silence. One crane has vanished from the channel. The Americans didn't cut it apart. They lifted it whole. Across the harbor, other miracles unfold. In the outer basin, divers patch hull breaches on the scuttled freighter Belmont. Compressed air hisses into sealed compartments. For hours, nothing. Then the hull shudders. Water begins to stream from her decks. Slowly, she rises, a ghost ship returning from the dead. The Portland follows 2 days later. Then the tugboat Herman, then the barge Ost 14. One by one, vessels that were supposed to block channels for months are refloated, towed aside, and cleared. By July 10th, the main channels are nearly open. Crews work past exhaustion, fueled by something the Germans never calculated into their equations, the momentum of the possible. And now, everyone is asking the same question. When will the first ship come in? July 16th, 1944. 0800 hours. The Liberty ship SS John J. Montgomery appears on the horizon, her bow cutting through morning swells. On the Cherbourg pier, hundreds of engineers, divers, and construction troops line the quay, watching in silence. She enters the channel, the same channel that 20 days ago was choked with sunken ships and toppled cranes. Her hull passes over waters where the Portland once blocked all passage. She navigates past the spot where a 90-ton gantry crane lay buried. No one speaks. The only sounds are her engines and the cry of gulls. At 0842 hours, the Montgomery ties up at the main quay. Mooring lines are secured. The gangway drops. Then the cheers erupt. Men embrace. Some stand quietly, exhausted smiles breaking through weeks of fatigue. A young diver named Barker sits on a bollard, one of the newly installed bollards, and simply stares at the ship, tears streaming down his face. 20 days. From Colonel Sibley's first survey to the first cargo ship unloading ammunition, rations, and medical supplies. The corpse has a heartbeat again. The numbers tell the story of what follows. By late July, Cherbourg is handling thousands of tons of supplies daily. By August, it's processing more cargo per day than it did before the war. Over the next 11 months, it will handle more tonnage than Germany receives through all its Atlantic and North Sea ports combined. The dead harbor has become the beating heart of Allied logistics. On the front lines, the impact is immediate. The breakout from Normandy, Operation Cobra, launches with full supply confidence. Patton's Third Army races across France, never wanting for fuel or ammunition. The rapid advance that will carry Allied forces to the German border by autumn is possible because Cherbourg never stops delivering. Without it, the offensive might have stalled. German forces might have gained time to reorganize defensive lines. The war in Western Europe might have dragged into 1946. Instead, the port the Germans killed in June is feeding the advance that will reach Berlin by spring. In German high command, reports arrive with increasing urgency. Cherbourg is operational. Not in 6 months, not in 90 days, in 20 days. Some commanders quietly acknowledge the catastrophe for what it is, a fundamental miscalculation of American capability. They had destroyed the port as thoroughly as doctrine required. The Americans had simply rebuilt faster than doctrine imagined possible. Hitler's reaction is different. He rages that his demolition teams failed, that the destruction wasn't thorough enough, that someone must be held accountable. He misses the real lesson entirely. In an industrial war, the enemy could build faster than Germany could destroy. The doctrine of scorched earth denial, so effective in Naples, Palermo, Belgium, has collapsed in the face of American logistics. But the story doesn't end here. The port thrums with activity through autumn, winter, and into the spring of 1945. Millions of tons of cargo, thousands of ships, the lifeline that never stops beating. And 1 year after Colonel Sibley first walked those shattered quays, one final scene will close the circle and deliver the emotional punch that makes this more than just a story about engineering. It's a story about what's possible when people refuse to accept the word impossible. June 27th, 1945, Cherbourg Harbor. Exactly 1 year later. Colonel Sibley walks the same quay where he once stood surrounded by ruins. But the landscape has been reborn. New gantry cranes tower over the piers, their steel frames gleaming in the morning sun. Expanded berths stretch along the waterfront where collapsed warehouses once stood. Ships line the docks, but these vessels aren't bringing ammunition and tanks into battle. They're loading troops and equipment bound for home. The fortress port that was supposed to stay dead for 6 months has become a gateway to peace. A staff car pulls up near the main administration building. General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben steps out, his Wehrmacht uniform replaced by civilian clothes. He's here as part of a military historical documentation project. Former commanders returning to examine the sites they once defended or destroyed. An American logistics officer escorts him through the harbor. Von Schlieben walks slowly, studying everything. The efficient cargo operations, the repaired breakwaters, the bustling activity of a port working at full capacity. He stops at the spot where the 2 gantry cranes once lay, toppled in the water. New cranes now stand in their place, lifting containers with mechanical precision. Through an interpreter, von Schlieben finally asks the question that has haunted him for a year. How did you restore it in only 20 days? The American officer considers the question, then gives an answer that has become legend among the engineering corps. We brought more equipment to fix your port than you brought to destroy it. And we brought something else you didn't account for. People who believed it could be done. The numbers tell the broader story. Over 12 months of operation, Cherbourg handled millions of tons of cargo, more than any other port in the European theater. It became the model for rapid port restoration, its techniques studied and replicated in Bremen, Hamburg, and Le Havre as the war moved into Germany. Most importantly, it validated a doctrine that many had dismissed as wasteful American excess. That logistics and construction could win wars as decisively as any battlefield victory. That industrial capacity applied to building could overcome any amount of effort spent on destruction. 2 philosophies. 1 decisive test. German engineers spent months planning the perfect corpse. A harbor so thoroughly destroyed it would take half a year to restore, buying precious time for the Wehrmacht to reorganize its defenses. American engineers spent years preparing to resurrect exactly such corpses. Building doctrine, training personnel, stockpiling equipment, and cultivating a culture that treated impossible as simply a challenge not yet met. In the industrial age, they learned, real power doesn't belong to the side that can destroy the most. It belongs to the side that can rebuild faster than the enemy can tear down. The final image. Late afternoon, June 1945. A Liberty ship pulls away from Cherbourg's main pier, her decks crowded not with ammunition crates but with soldiers. Men heading home after years of war. She navigates the channel where 27 wrecks once blocked all passage, sailing past breakwaters that were blown open and rebuilt, past piers that were demolished and reconstructed. She passes through a harbor that was never supposed to live again. Her wake catches the sun as she turns toward the open Atlantic, carrying her cargo of survivors out of a port that refused to die. Proof that construction, not destruction, writes the final chapter of wars. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each story matters. Each story deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from.